Hello, everybody.
Robina.
I'm here. Good. All right.
Thank you so much, Venerable Robina, for coming.
Okay.
We'll just
Happy to be here.
again. And we'd like to offer mandala, please.
Right. And so just letting people know what we're doing. It's called mandala. Actually, you know, when you look at those round pictures and everybody says, oh, that's a mandala, you know, well, what it is actually that's from Tantra. And that's like an architectural drawing of the abode of the Buddhas at the more subtle level. These Buddhas who manifest in subtle light bodies, they've all got their own abodes. We all live in an environment. Well, that's their environment. But here we're talking the sutra teachings, and this is the mandala. This is the universe, our mandala, our universe. And what it is, I mean, when you read the contents of it, it sounds a very surprising universe. It's not something we are familiar with. For example, we didn't know, did we? We didn't learn in geography that our sky is blue because it reflects off lapis lazuli. Well, that's what this model says. But if we don't know all the contents of that model of the universe, which is Mount Meru in the middle and the sun and the moon and the goddesses and the sacred cows and Lord knows what, if you don't know that one, don't worry. Just think of all the marvelous things that we know about in our world that are our karmic appearance, and we pile them all up as big as we can, be very creative, and think of offering it all to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It has great meaning, you know. That's to think as we say these words. Person leads us.
Saji Paki Juxing Mehetop Tramri Rahabling Jin Yidegen Padi Sangye Jing Du Mikte Ua Idro Kunam Dak Jing la che pa sho Jetsun la ma dam pa kye nam hi che kui ka la en se chu zin trik Jita sampe du jezin ma Lahazav Gecheki Chapa Wahabtu So Idam Guratna Mandalakam Niyatayame.
All right, good. Thank you so much, Jason. So now we can set our motivation, as the Lamas would say. We can state our purpose. This next prayer. The first two lines is reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, and then the second two lines stating this marvelous altruistic aspiration that we're going to listen to these teachings. The short term is, of course, to learn about impermanence and death so we can help ourselves die well, to get another human rebirth so we can help others die well. But the bigger picture is so we can get enlightened, so we can help all sentient beings. Thinking that's why we're sitting here together. Sangye charam soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi. Dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangshu badu dagni kyab suchi. Dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok. So we're saying until we are enlightened, we will rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And by the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, may we all, each of us, become a Buddha so we can benefit all the suffering sentient beings. Okay, good, thank you. So, okay, yesterday we went through the first stages of Lama Zopa's book. We talked about the two approaches to being ready for death. One is to live the life in the framework of impermanence, Buddha's simple teachings, the evident fact that everything changes, and looking at how we live in denial of that because our enormous attachment, particularly to ourself and our body. We talked about that, how to prepare to live your life. And that is enough. If you lived your life really well, basically, it's exactly the same as anything. It's not mysterious, you know. You've got a driving test in a month. If you just sit there thinking, oh, what will it be like on the driving test, and what will the driver look like, and how will it be, and how do I stop myself from being nervous, and what red lights will he go through, and where's the left gear, where's the right one, you'll never be prepared for driving tests. How do you prepare for the driving test? It's so evident. It's a joke. You start driving, for goodness sake. If you drive every day, whoever the driving test driver is, whatever red light he takes you through, you'll be ready for it. It's so simple. That's the main teaching. That's it, absolutely the main teaching. Because if you live in virtue, live in goodness, live understanding permanence, know you could die at any moment. And then and given that you could die at any moment, because you realize the third point that Atisha gets to point out to us, that the only things at the time of death, given the Buddha's view that your mind is the continuity of mental moments, goes back and back and back, given that your mind will go forward, 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 given that that everything you think and do and say produces your future, you're in charge, babe. Given that everything you do that's virtuous, which is an action with body and speech based on a virtue, or an action based on body and speech that refrains from harming, those will sow delicious, wonderful seeds in your bank vault, so that when death does come, when you don't know when it'll be, whether it's like, the point yesterday, whether you're in a car crash, or whether you just suddenly, or whether you're dying slowly, you will be ready for it. It's so logical. Because why we suffer at death, as Rinpoche points out, why so much fear for most people, is because you live in denial of that driving test. You don't want to know about the driving test. You can't stand the thought of it. So you just live in denial of it, worrying about it behind, you're going to be a complete mess when you finally go for your driving test. It's just so logical. So, of course, this is the Buddhist view. I mean, if you're not clear about the Buddhist view, you can't force it down your throat. You got to think about it if you want to. You can decide. You're the boss of your life. You can decide to have the materialist view, which means you'll fall into a black hole or you just die. That's up to you. Or you can have a Christian view, Muslim view, Australian Aboriginal view, whatever you want. It's your choice. We're talking Buddha here. So then, of course, the point is, if you want to help people die, that's when you need to understand to navigate this process itself. That's the skill we need. That's how we can help others. So as I said, the first part of the book talks about, goes through the 8 stages of death. We discussed all that very briefly. Then the Sutra 1 about the 12 links, what arises at different periods. And, quite technical, when the karmic seed that does determine the future life is triggered. And that's the period when the mouse or the bird or the dog or your grandma needs you most. We discussed all of this, we went through these different things, and I'm welcoming more questions, of course. So then we went through the 8 stages. Then we went through roughly speaking, the different things you can do, the different, all the chapters of what you can do the weeks and months before. Which has got all these different chapters, what can see, what can you touch, there's mantras and different mantras to see, different practices to do, different, prayer wheels to touch, blessing strings to touch, mantras on the crown, mantras on the chest, lots of these practical things, millions of these bits of suggestions, and they're mentioned, and then they're all in the back, numbered 1 to 87, you can choose. Then, of course, the crucial time is when it gets closer to the time of death. And this is when you're familiar with it yourself. You can start to recognize, when this process starts. We talked about that. And then we talked about the different scenarios by the time you stop breathing, the next lot of chapters are, that's what we generally refer to when they're dead. Although we know the mind is still there. So the next chapter is what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do, in other words, from the moment the breath stops, what to do. Well, then all these different practices Rinpoche recommends. An ideal scenario, as we said, leave for 3 days, because it could be up to 3 days before the subtle mind leaves. Or if you die in hospital or in another environment where, you might have half an hour if you're lucky. There's just different scenarios there, what to do. Keep your wits about you. Talk about, discuss it. That doesn't say this in the book. This is me saying it, You discuss in advance with the hospital. You'd like to keep the body as long. How long can I have, please? If a mummy does die in the middle of the night, don't start doing things. Call me up immediately. Don't touch her. Just let people know. The hospitals are very kind and want to help, And then we talked about when the mind does leave the body. We talked about the 8 stages: gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. It's described in terms of 8 stages, but in total there are 25 different events, through those 8. And then we read from Lama Zopa's chapter, and this is for those who are practitioners who've received highest yoga tantra initiations, and why death is what the yogis have been waiting for, and how we can all prepare for this. But because the method for preparing for death is built into these sadhanas, in the meditation on emptiness. It's totally technical, and it's brilliant if you've got those practices. This is the best way, as Rinpoche says, to prepare for death, because these great yogis, especially like Lama Yeshe, like other yogis, when they're able to go, because they've practiced their whole life, they're able to go through these 8 stages with complete control. They're able to stay conscious at each ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle level. Of course, that's unheard of for us. I mean, look how we don't have any control. When you go to sleep, these 8 stages happen every time. Since you're born, as many nights as you've slept, you've been through these 8 stages. And who's aware of it? Nobody, because we've not practiced, you know. And who's been unconscious? I mean, you go to sleep and next minute you wake up 8 hours later. No awareness of the process at all. But the great yogis can control this process completely and meditate as they go on emptiness to cut all the misconceptions from the mind. So they can, and then when they get to death, because the mind, the clear light mind of death is the best quality one. The clear light mind of a regular meditation, even if you get to the clear light mind, is not nearly as potent. But the death one is the best. That's why they're looking forward to death. It's the time, it's the test. That's their driving test. They're ready for it. Because that's the most powerful, the most subtle level of mind. The best clear light mind is the time of death. And why they want that is because it's the microscope of their mind. Because with that microscope of the mind, they can clear up all the rubbish and literally get enlightened. That's the point. It's a technical thing. It's not some hippie, trippy, mystical thing. But for ordinary people, like I said, you know, when the time is right, that indestructible drop made up of the subtle red, white kundalini from the mummy and the daddy at the time of conception, which begins at our heart chakra, then everything, or at the end, at the time of death, everything goes down to that, from the feet up and the head down, and the very subtle mind is at the heart chakra in that indestructible drop. And then when it gets to there, we're just unconscious. We can stay there for 3 days, but we're unconscious. We're not aware of the process. So when the indestructible drop opens, that second is when the very subtle consciousness, you know, carrying all the karmic imprints, everything we've ever done in this life and all the past lives that haven't yet ripened, then it leaves the body. And from that second, it then reverses the 8 stages and it wakes up in this kind of intermediate state, which is just the same as a dream state. That's your subtle consciousness. And the quality of your the quality of your intermediate state, the bardo, is pretty much determined by the seed that's triggered that'll determine your next life. So if you're going to be born in the hell realms or the animals, it will not be a fun experience. It'll be like the worst nightmare. If you're going to be born as a human or in the gods or in the pure land, it'll be a very blissful, kind of a very nice experience. It won't be awful. It'll be weird, because all dreams are weird and because we don't know what's going on. That's our subtle mind. And then when the mummy and daddy hop into bed, in our case, being born human, you know, they hopped into bed, and that was the condition that then triggered the ending of our intermediate state. And then next millisecond, you don't have to climb on an aeroplane. Like if you died in Tibet, you know, if I died in Tibet, something like, you know, a few weeks before 4 a.m. on December, no, that was when I was born, wrong one. Anyway, never mind, whatever it is, right? You don't climb on an aeroplane and have to wait and put your ticket in and get to mummy and daddy's, you know, fallopian tube. No, that second shows the concept of time and the concept of distance are conceptually created by us humans. That's, by the way, a very fascinating point. You know, there's a person who's born in Tibet, who dies in Tibet. And we can deduce many of us must have been in Tibet. That's how come we like Tibetan Buddhism. It's not surprising. And we died at some point in Tibet. Our mind went into the bardo. And then we had the karma to be born to somebody in Melbourne. Australia, I know it's interesting. Australia is one of the most, it's got the most, dense population of Tibetan Buddhists. It's said to be a really good kind of rebirth. I mean, it depends on who you are. For some people, it's the worst rebirth. But certainly from the Buddhist point of view, you know, you're born with it, you know, it's a lot of Australians anyway, like Tibetan Buddhism. So we can deduce, we didn't have to decide, well, what country will I go to next? If you're clairvoyant, yes, you can prepare your future rebirth. But karma takes care. So somehow we found ourselves, not somehow, it's the law. We understand the law of karma, we understand how it happened. But Australia became a decent place to get reborn. You know, we met the Dharma, got reasonable conditions. I mean, you know, in America, that they're still fighting to get $15 to be the $15 to be the minimum wage. Still in the federal government, it's something like $7 or $8. I mean, it's hard to believe, isn't it? 45 years ago in New York, I earned that amount when I worked as a typist, you know, in an agency. Maybe $5 I earned. 45 years ago, and I paid $100 a month rent. Now I'd get, if I had to work for a federal agency, I'd get $7 or $8 a month, an hour, and I'd pay $2,000 for the same apartment. I mean, it's just beyond monstrous. Americans are so stubborn, I tell you. I'm allowed to criticize them. I've got an American passport as well as Australian. So shocking. They fight against it so strongly. $15, you know. So Australia's a good rebirth. If you get a job, you get a decent salary, you get free medical. No Americans can believe you get free medical. They look wide-eyed at you. Isn't it, Americans? Any Americans listening to me? There you go. It's true, isn't it, Sharky? I mean, I'm an American too, so I'm not being prejudiced. I'm just telling some good facts about Australia. But they're just as racist as Americans. Don't worry about it. Australian whites are just as racist as American whites. Join the universe, you know, and just as sexist as well. Stupid conservative governments and everything. But never mind. Got a few good qualities. Anyway, never mind. Blah blah. So where were I? Yeah. So our mind ran to a mummy in Australia. We wouldn't have to carry. And this that's an important point. If we do take on board this idea of reincarnation is true, we've got to hear it. You don't wait. You don't come on a plane. You know. You don't have to wait in 1 millisecond. You're dead in Tibet and you're now reborn that second in conception in Melbourne. You've got to think about that. It's kind of interesting. So it sort of shows, isn't it? And I'll tell you a story actually that indicates this. It really shows at time. I mean, we've got this human world, and we've got human karmic appearances, which means we experience things a certain way. So we have a sense of time, don't we? If you know you've got to drive for 30 minutes, you know how long. Except when you're a kid. Are we nearly there? Are we nearly there? Are we nearly there? Feels like it's 15 hours, doesn't it? But in general, we have a sense of how long time takes. That's a conceptual story that we have created. So this is fascinating. I remember years ago, I saw online, like in the 90s, online, is a movie online by an American doctor who was Christian, who interviewed his patients about these so-called near-death experiences. But what was fascinating, they weren't all just the white light ones. They were terrifying ones, which I think is a really excellent thing, because that's the Buddha's view. So it was very fascinating. There were two examples, two parts, two people in the story, different people he interviewed. I think I've got these two guys a bit mixed up, but never mind, it's fascinating. So this is the particular one. One, he was a fellow, an American, he was a businessman, Christian, and he had to have a heart operation. And so he's sitting in the bed, very worried and anxious about it. And suddenly he finds himself standing next to his wife, who's by the bed. And he talks to her, but she doesn't she doesn't listen to him. She doesn't hear him, and he gets annoyed with her. But then he looks at the bed and he sees a body there. So he kind of vaguely twigs that it's his body, but he couldn't quite connect with it, you know? So basically his subtle mind, now this is the interesting point. We talk about out of body, but you don't leave your body. Subtle mind has that capacity. That's what clairvoyance is. When you've really got clairvoyance, it's like you are there. That's the power of the subtle mind. So some people have it by accident. They didn't plan to. He didn't plan to. So then he suddenly heard these voices out in the corridor. Come on, John, come on. He said, oh, good, I'm going for my operation. So he went out to the corridor and he walked along this corridor. Well, there's two parts of the story, but the part I want to tell you here was this walk along the corridor. He said, it took me as long as walking from here to Alaska. Now, even if it was just next door to Alaska, forget about whether it was in Texas. That's his experience. And probably it was no more than an actual minute in our terms. Think about this. It took me as long as walking from here to Alaska. But in reality, human times, a minute. So this is why I really start to think about when they talk about you spend eons in the hell realms, or you spend eons in the pure lands. I'm wondering whether it's just the experience of it, which is the point. Who cares if it's only 1 second human time? If it feels like an eon, it is an eon. But it's kind of an interesting point. Anyway, the other part of the story is interesting. This shows our karmic appearances. How, due to our own tendencies, our own imprints, our own past karma, we have a certain way of experiencing things. So, okay, he's walking on the corridor, and then suddenly they start being mean to him, ripping his flesh and abusing him. It was an appalling experience. And then they left him, ripped to pieces and devastated, and there was complete darkness. And he said it was I forget, something like the depth of despair and darkness that he'd never known before. And he didn't know what to do. So he thought, I'd better pray. So he started, Our Father who art in heaven, and he couldn't go any further because he hadn't prayed since he was a little kid. Then he tried, the Lord is my shepherd. He couldn't go any further. And then he just shouted out from his heart, Jesus, help me. And then this white light from way over there, tiny, tiny white light, and it came closer, more brilliant, more radiant. It was Jesus, of course, and he calls it Jesus. Now, you listen to me. Can you imagine if a naked green lady turned up? He would have had a heart attack because he didn't have Buddhist karmic appearances. He had Christian karmic appearances. So this light coming, and it became completely blissful. It completely healed his body. He was radiant. He was in full of joy. And of course, he wanted to go with Jesus. And Jesus says, no, you've got to go back and serve me. Well, I mean, he did, and you would. So that's a very interesting experience. I find that very fascinating. That shows karmic appearances. You know, all the people who have out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, and when they're in their coma and they come back and they tell you all the story, and that many people report hearing voices and someone says, do this and do that. And of course, if you're a Christian, you'd call it God. But if you're a Buddhist, you'd call it Buddha, wouldn't you? It's your karmic appearances, and it's the concepts you have. It's not just self-existent out there Jesus, you know. We think it's like that. It's how you call it, which is emptiness, really. But the other story was interesting also. This fellow, both of them confessed to being mean to their wives. They both confessed that. This fellow was mean to his wife as well, but he was an alcoholic. And he suddenly finds himself, you know, dying, and he's walking, and this is how they often talk about walking on a corridor, you know, along a corridor, not white light at the other end. Believe me, hell was at the other end. This hideous fire, and all his friends who died in the fire, in hell, in their own form. And this is what's interesting. I said yesterday, remember, when you have a vision of a ghost in a house, 15th century ghost, that's how she did look then. She's dead now, but that's the vision you have of her, because that's who she was then. So the same here. Believe me, if you're in the middle of a fire, your body ain't looking like your old, you know, your friend with his, you know, with his beer belly and his clothes on. But that's the karmic appearance he had of his friends. And they're all screaming at him, don't come here, don't come, go back, go back. So he went back too, and he served Jesus as well. Of course you would. I think they're wonderful stories. So it's showing karma, but also this. But the other point I find fascinating is over the centuries, in all the realms of, in all the different human cultures, Australian Aboriginals, American Indians, Africans, you name it, every corner of the planet, you've got people who think about the meaning of life. Some people just have sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's it. We know that. But some people, we call them philosophers. We call them religious philosophers. We call them whatever you want, thinkers. We call them whatever you like. They think about the meaning of life. Well, how amazing. I mean, how dare we criticize any of them? Sure, you don't have to agree with any of them. And some are pretty wacko. Some are pretty heavy. But there's human beings trying to work out the meaning of life. Well, I think it's amazing. Good on them. So basically, the world is full of countless different viewpoints about the meaning of life, isn't it? Put it that way. They've all got equal status. The scientific ones, the materialist ones, the communist ones, the feminist ones, the Christian ones, the Buddhist ones, they're all different humans coming up with different viewpoints. Well done. So here we're talking Buddhas, okay? Now, what I seem to notice when I listen to different people, like that experience right there, this dude saw hell. You read Mr. Dante, that Italian chap. He wrote all about hell. The Muslims talk about hell. The Hindus talk about hell. The Buddhists talk about hell. Well, there's something going on here. Okay, clearly, if you're using your brain and you're looking at a microscope into a brain, you don't see a hell because you're only talking about your gross level of consciousness, which is the materialist view. But as soon as you get to something subtler, these weird things come up. Well, it seems to me that there must be some common ground somewhere that they've observed similar things. I think that's very compelling. You can't just be like the arrogant materialists who say they're all insane and they've all made it up. We're the only intelligent ones, which is what materialists think, which is extremely arrogant. So the difference is, though, of course, their interpretations of how come it's that and what it is. So the Christians would, roughly speaking, say that, you know, God sends you there and it lasts for eternity. Buddhists would say it's your own karmic appearance. That demands we understand emptiness a little bit. It exists. These states exist. They're states of mind, you know, and coming along with a certain level of physicality. It's described in the Vajrayana, the technology of it for the Buddhists anyway. So it's kind of interesting. Don't believe it, don't not believe it, but it's interesting that lots of people all over the planet come up with these views. It's very fascinating. So, of course, the Buddha's view is we created it. No one sent us there. There's no punishment. There's no reward. As Lama Yeshe said, hell isn't some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. No, it's the manifestation of the negative past energy of that suffering sentient being. That's what Lama Zopa means by our karmic appearance, you know. It's very fascinating. So anyway, we talked about these different things, but I think again I want to emphasize from yesterday, and I've touched on it a few times, is the difference in the materialist view about when death is, which of course is when the breath stops. And therefore for us, once the breath has stopped, it doesn't matter what you do in a sense. But this is a hugely important point for the Buddhist one. That's why you leave the body for 3 days. And that's why even when the body is there looking as dead as a doornail, no breath coming, the subtle consciousness can still be there. And like that woman on the operating table can be aware of it. So you treat incredible respect. And that's exactly the same as when a person's in a coma. They can be totally conscious. So you treat their room, the hospital room, with peace, quiet, having mantras playing. It's so important because it's acknowledging there is a subtler level of consciousness there. The other point is that you can subdue physical pain. You can medicate physical pain. Amazing, how great. But you cannot medicate mental suffering. And that's why when if a person's freaking out when they're when they're screaming in agony with their physical pain and their mind is too super distressed, not just because of the pain, because of their fear, then you put them, you drug them out, they're going to have nightmarish experiences. So you're not helping their mind at all. That's why, to help a person at that time, be steady, be calm, have them hear mantras. You do everything for their mind. Lama Yeshe was a highly evolved yogi, according to Lama Zopa, fully realized, extraordinary being. He got very sick. He had a bad heart. When he was a little boy, he got sick and he had one valve missing or one valve in his heart not working. So any Western doctor, allopathic doctor, whoever saw him, allopathic doctor, whatever the word is, said they couldn't understand why he was still alive. It wouldn't have been possible to survive with only these three. But the power of his own mind, the power of his experiences and his realizations, he kept himself alive. So he died at the age of 49. His heart had grown so strong that it was so big that it was squashing his the cavity in there. He couldn't breathe properly even. So then they started to see the symptoms. The symptoms were growing for years. This was in 1983. And he was in India, and he was staying in a farmhouse out of Delhi, and people were taking care of him. And I remember there's this wonderful letter. I must read it to you, I think I'll read it to you. It's very moving. It's about death. I wish I'd put it in the book now, but I didn't. Let me see if I can find it. It's very moving. Oh, can't see it. Can't see it. Maybe I'll find it in our break and I'll read it to you. It's very moving. Anyway, Lama's a great yogi. He's complete control of his mind. But the way he talked to his friend, he wrote to his beloved friend, his Dharma brother, and he said it was really just the drugs he had to be on. It was really distressed the mind. So that's a great yogi, can be influenced by the drugs and you can't get your mind clear. So the most important job is to find navigate the use of the different drugs to help as much as anything to help the person be conscious. This is what's so important, Whereas in our culture, perhaps we have a tendency to just want to drug them out of their brain. They're less trouble. And we just think, oh, look at them. Aren't they peaceful? No, they're not peaceful. Not necessarily. That's an important point. But the other one is, of course, the subtle mind is more powerful. So you can be conscious in your coma. You can be aware as you're dreaming. You can be aware on the operating table during your operation and when you're technically dead as they're cutting out your organs, because your subtle mind is there. So these things are to consider, take into consideration. Very important. The mouse as well, the monkey as well, the guinea pig as well, the ant, even the ant, the fly, all of them. Help them die peacefully. Put them in a peaceful place. Let them hear mantras. Best thing you can do. So, okay, so then once the mind has left the body, and I said in each of those scenarios, you check if the mind has left by doing these different things. And then if it has left, now the body's finished. You can do what you like with it now, But the mind, now we want to continue helping the mind. So now for the next 49 days, there are lots of things you can do. Traditionally 49 days, because that's the length in human terms of the time in the bardo at the maximum. It can be a lot shorter, but usually not longer. That's people's experience. So this traditionally you do these practices, and there's so many things to do, and all of them are for the benefit, one, of the person who's dead, but also for yourself, Lots and lots of practices you can do. They're all in the book. So one of the things is, for example, the moment the mind has left the body, now you can prepare the body. You don't touch the body till then. Now you can prepare the body for the cremation or the burial. You can decide, So there's different things Rinpoche talks about in the book. He quotes, for example, one of the practices he has all the way through is you put mantras on the body, just like the Catholics with those scapulars we had, on the body. You touch the body. This has a benefit. So that you can certainly do. And he mentions Kirti Senchab Rinpoche, one of his lamas from Kham, Eastern Tibet. What they had the tradition to do was, when they rolled out mantras, they have long rolls of paper with mantras written on them. They would literally wrap the body in rolls and rolls of mantras with the mantras touching the body, and then cremate the body like that. There's lots of things you can do like that. Things, or you certainly have mantras on the body. You would, but they don't have they don't technically have what we call a funeral or a memorial, but so we got a chapter in there how you do that. Well, you'd make sure you got the body all ready, and then when you take the body to whatever the place is, once you're sure the mind has gone, then you can bring your friends together. But one of the crucial things for the Buddhist view, of course, is you certainly talk about their good qualities and rejoice in their life, which is marvelous for us. That's good for us. But what about for them? Well, you say prayers. You do the King of Prayers, for example. And you could give a talk about impermanence, even dare to remind everybody in the audience who's got the hubris of thinking that I'm a living person and there's poor old dead grandma, that, honey, child, this will be you one day. Nothing wrong with that. It makes it a learning experience. It makes it a teaching. Not just making us feel relieved that we're not the one in the funeral, in the coffin. But you do things for the person's sake. Everything has to be for the person's sake as well as our own. So then you prepare the body. But then if you're going to have it cremated, you make sure, that you take, if you're going to have the body buried, you make sure you keep back a bit of hair or nails, some part of the body, just a little bit, because then there's a particular practice that Rinpoche really praises, they all do in the Tibetan monasteries, called jangwa. The actual practice isn't in the book, but it's referred to. And you go to a qualified lama in a monastery who would do it for you. And that's where they bless the remains. And this is said to be so beneficial. Rinpoche is so optimistic. He's got so many practices that you can do. He even got a section where he says, if you, like the ideal scenario is before you stop breathing, a virtuous calming seed is triggered and you get a decent human rebirth. You're happy. Now, the next scenario would be, that a negative one has been triggered. But you can change it from there on. You can change it from there. You can change it in the bardo. You can change it even afterwards, even by doing jangwa. And the karma's there. They're in the bardo and they're getting ready to go to the hell realms. But by purifying, by blessing their ashes, by blessing their remains, you make it a holy object. Even that, Rinpoche says, can help them reverse the karma. He's got so many things, so optimistic about things you can do. Never too late, So that's one of the really powerful practices he recommends you do after you've had the funeral and after the body's gone. You keep you keep some ashes. You can chuck all the rest of the ashes out if you like, but you keep some. You don't have to keep the lot, but keep some. And then you get the ashes or the other remains, the nails and the hair, blessed. And Rinpoche just so powerful in the way he says it's such an amazing practice. He said, what we tend to do, we take our ashes, we throw them to the wind or in the water, but he said there's no benefit. It's just sentimental. There's no benefit. Nobody benefits. There's no benefit to your loved one, and there's no benefit. It's nice for us. It feels nice, but there's no benefit. There's no merit. But if you bless the ashes, then there's different things you can do. Or the remains. You can mix it with plaster and you make those little tsatsa images. It's in the book. Those little kind of bas relief, little Buddha images. This is so powerful. You can mix it into a stupa. You can mix the ashes into a statue. You can then bless them and then scatter them to the wind, and whoever touches them will be blessed by it. All the birds. You just put into the water. All the fishes will be benefited. By blessing them, you make it beneficial. He said, but it's going to the cemetery and offering flowers. It's nice, but there's no merit involved. So these different things it talks about. It's very practical, very helpful. Giving somebody things away. One of the things they talk about, 3 things you do at the end before the person dies. You make sure they give away. You make sure they give away all their things. You make sure they get some blessed. One of the things they get some blessed. Some like a blessed pill, for example, and make sure they swallow it. That can help them. But the one about giving all their things away, of course, we handle that by writing legal wills, don't we? And that's really important because there's no benefit to the person dying with attachment to all their things. It's really, if they give their things away, that's practicing generosity, and that can only help their future life. That's really helpful. And then when all the other practices you can do during those 49 days, once you've buried or cremated your loved one, and once you've blessed the ashes by doing jangwa, other practices as well you can do, then there's all sorts of things you can do by having special pujas, and you can do a retreat on behalf of the person. You can publish a book using the person's money. You can do virtuous things with their money. All of this is benefiting the karma of the person, including the cat, including the dog, including your baby, including your grandma. It's to benefit the person. So benefit weeks and months before, benefit hours before, benefit the time they stop breathing, benefit the time the mind leaves the body, benefit after they've even been buried, all the way through these different practices you can do. And I think this is what people find quite helpful, because even if you're a Christian, there's much practical advice here. And people we all feel we want to do something. Especially for pets, people love doing things for their pets. They really love doing it, because you feel like you're helping, not just sitting there hopeless. And that's the use of this book. It's a handbook, so practical. So ask me some questions now. About anything since yesterday, whatever you like.
We have a couple of questions here, one from Francis and one from Bruna. So I'll just ask Francis's first because it was about blessing the ashes. So Francis is asking, do the ashes have to be blessed within that 49-day period of Bardo?
I mean, of course, best, but never too late, Francis. You can get your ashes of your husband off the mantelpiece now, and you can bless them, and you can make them into little tsatsars. This is something so moving, I mean, it's never too late, Francis. It's never too late. And it's something so good for the people. I mean, I know a friend of mine, when her son died, I mean, it was devastating when to have your son die. He was 40 and he had a wife and kids. And the wife was just beyond, this young woman, devastated. And the ashes were sitting on this mantelpiece. She didn't want to let go of them, But it's sort of kind of, what are you going to do with this? So then I said, why don't you tell them? I told the mother, who's Buddhist, I said, why don't you tell her, let's bless the ashes and make little images of the Buddha and give these to everybody. And everyone was so happy. Instead of seeing just a canister of ashes, you see a little Buddha image, and your loved ones, your beloved, your daddy or your husband's ashes are mixed with it. There's something very nice about that. It's very special to do it. It's in the book, Francis, you'll see. And it's a listing, certainly the latest version of the book, there's a list of all the different centers who can do it for you. But you can always contact Kopan Monastery because they can do all these things. It's such a nice thing to do. It really is. Yeah, never too late, darling. Good. What else, people?
Okay, so there's a question from Bruna as well. So Bruna is asking, recently I've been diagnosed with a terminal heart condition with 6 months to 2 years' time. I'm a lapsed Catholic and have recently become interested in Buddhism. Could you please give me a guide to teachings and/or rituals that would help me face death with a calm, gentle manner for me and those close to me?
Well, Bruna, that's a big fat question. It's the essence of the question everybody should be asking, darling. But you're asking it because you've now moved from what the world thinks. You've moved from the living group to the dying group, haven't you? But actually, we're all in the dying group, Bruna. But you're just intelligent enough to know it. So, I mean, I could say the simple answer. I don't want to be rude to you. The simple answer is every single word I'm saying here is from this book of Lama Zopa's. So I highly recommend you get the latest version. You can get it as a Kindle book or whatever it is it's called. And I just suggest a way to help you. I'm happy to help you. And you need someone to talk to. I think you start looking at the book, just reading it, sweetheart, and just read it very objectively and think about the meaning. All the things I'm describing here are straight from the book. And then I think, you can talk to Jason and Amy, or you can email me and we can discuss it as you go along. I would suggest you do that. Or if you already know somebody you can rely upon to talk to you, that's up to you. But you're very welcome to do all that. But I highly recommend you start with that because the question is perfect, but it covers everything, darling. And all the way through, the crucial thing I would say is it totally is necessary for you, not just to, I'm not saying you are, just to leap in and grab hold of anything. I mean, you've been told you're going to die, baby. We haven't been told. I haven't been told. So I've got the hubris of thinking I'm not going to die yet. Ridiculous. So it's powerful what's happening for you, Bruno. I can imagine that. So, sweetheart, read it with a very open mind and keep looking around. If you don't like what you're reading, keep looking, keep checking, because you're the boss of this situation, you know. But the point I'm getting at is every single question you ask, according to the Buddhist perspective, if you have confidence in this process, you will get exactly what you want. But I'd even say it for somebody who's a devoted Catholic. If they have with great faith in their Catholic upbringing, they will die a happy, peaceful death as well. So it's up to you to find what works for you, sweetheart. That's the key point now. That's the key point for you, Bruna. And you're more than welcome to email me. You don't have to. You can talk to Amy, talk to Jason, whatever you like, or person you know, but I'm more than happy to kind of navigate it with you. It's up to you, sweetheart. I hope that helps, Bruna. But I'd suggest get this book. It's a good start. Yes? Can I see you here? Let me see you if I can see you. Are you here? Or is that on the note? I'm trying to look for Bruna's name. Where's Bruna? I can't see a Bruna here.
Bruna, do you just want to say hello? You're just unmuted.
Oh,
there you are, darling. Hello, Bruna. I'm happy to see you, sweetheart.
hi.
You look like a good Italian Catholic, not just a Catholic, but an Italian Catholic. Is that right?
Yes. Half of them are lapsed anyway, so I'm joining through.
Where do you live, darling? Where do you live, Bruna?
I live in Aspendale.
Okay, perfect. So have you been listening to everything all yesterday as well?
Oh yes.
So
Definitely.
what do you think of all the stuff that you're hearing? I mean, how are you feeling about it? Be very straightforward. Is it interesting for you? Is it kind of like triggering some ideas for you? What do you think?
It's given me comfort.
Good.
And now I'm going to
look into it all.
That's
all you can do, Bruna. This is all you can do, darling, with confidence.
Yeah.
Really, but the broader point, Bruna, is, and this is the whole point, we all need to give ourselves this wake-up call, you know, is to start to think, okay, what is the hell of the purpose of life? Why am I here? These are the questions we have to ask if you haven't asked them before. Suddenly, instead of taking your life for granted, suddenly you realize you can't take your life for granted, you know, and this is what's good for all of us, Bruna, and you're taking this advantage and it's marvelous. So just in your own way, you read the books you can, you talk to the people you feel, but be confident in it. Don't freak out. Go one step at a time. And no, honey child, you are the one who's got to decide. You might want to go back to being a Catholic. You might want to become, who knows what you might want to do. It's up to you to be clear. So take it steady, one step at a time. Get good friends. Don't just rabbit on about it to everybody because people think you're stupid and they'll give you their own dumb ideas. So be very cautious who you talk to. Do you understand, Bruna?
Yes.
And get a good supportive group of people. And meanwhile, you're still Bruna and you're still a living person, you know? So take it one step at a time, honey.
And, you know, as I say there, it's for me. I need to do this, but
that's right.
I also feel that I need to do it for my family.
Also, you're absolutely right, darling, and you could be a powerful example. You know, when you read sometimes stories about children who die or people who die, everybody around them is deeply touched by it. It's a very special way to feel, Bruna. So you be like that. Exactly. It's for the sake of everybody. You know, it's
Thank you very much, Robina.
All right, sweet. And if you do want my email, you just I'm not saying you should. You do not have to, but ever you want to, you get it from Jason and Amy, and I'm more than happy to be in touch with you, sweet, if you want.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
I'm an old Catholic as well. Where did you go to school, darling? Did the nuns educate you?
No, I went to a public school.
High school.
So,
okay.
Yes. But,
okay.
I actually had my first Holy Communion in Italy.
Oh, you did? Oh, that would have been a big affair.
Oh, it was, yes. And then came out here and kind of had to do the whole thing all over again because I couldn't speak the language. And
oh God, yes, of course.
Anyway, look, we're here and yes.
Darling, you're one step at a time, Bruna, and I think you're great. You're really being brave, darling. We all should take example. Every one of us shouldn't just sit back with our arrogance thinking, oh no, I'm not dying. You know, not true. Not true. So good on you, Bruna. And thank you for asking.
Thank you, Robina.
Good, sweetheart. Good. Thank you, darling. What else, people? Talk to me. Any other questions?
A follow-up question, Venerable Robina, from Lakshmi. She says, my friend's husband is actively dying from a brain tumor, but neither he nor his wife have religious inclinations. I'd love to do some practices to help him, but also don't want to disrespect his views. What would you
exactly understand? Now, this is a really good point, Lakshmi, and many people ask this. So let's just really look at it rationally. my feeling is, that if I were, let's say, a Catholic, and I was being respectful to my friend who's not a Catholic, I don't think there's anything wrong with me invoking my Catholic God or anything to help this person. It's not insulting the person at all. They don't even have to know. It's not being naughty. I mean, this person's a materialist and they probably think they turn into dust. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not being sneaky. People often think it's being sneaky. You don't go and barge and on top of them and tell them this, but I think there's nothing wrong with you doing your own practice, your own prayers. I mean, I've even also found somebody, a friend of mine who's a materialist. I said, I'm doing some prayers for you. They were so happy, They said, thank you very much. They didn't know what they felt themselves, but they were glad to have somebody thinking about them. So I think there's no harm in you doing, if you're a Buddhist, to do Buddhist practices quietly for this person. It's like for a mouse or a dog, they don't mind. So and it can never harm. It's not possible to harm them. And if anything, it can only help. That's my thought. What do you think, Lakshmi? Do you agree with that thinking?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, but I just, thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I was respecting their views, and I had a bit of a dilemma about it, but that's
I know everybody's asked the same question. I think so. But are you seeing the reason why I think it's not intervening for them? They don't even have to know. It's not being, I mean, if you're invoking the devil to harm them, then I suggest that's kind of rude.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, But if you're only doing something to help them, nobody can complain if they ever found out about it. They can only be happy. I mean, it's not trying to manipulate them to get stuck into Jesus or stuck into Buddha. It's simply, according to the person's karma, whatever you can do, whether it's spiritual or physical, to help their mind navigate death, how can it not be helpful?
Yeah.
So, and it's for you to be clear, though, in your mind.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Good, Lakshmi. Thanks, darling. It's a very common point. It's a very interesting point, But I mean, if I were with them, then it's different. I wouldn't start barging in and telling them about Buddhism and trying to be fundamentalist. That, of course not. I'd talk to them. I'd say what a wonderful person they are, what a good life you've led, that kind of thing. Praise them and love them and respect them. That's what you would do directly to them if you have any direct contact,
Yeah.
Go on, people. What else?
David has a question he'd like to ask. Dave?
Oh, darling. Talk to me, David.
Yeah. Hi, Robina. Forgive me, I'm not exact with the names and dates, but 2016-17, Copan had the massive inauguration of the young Rinpoche.
Yes.
And then Lama Zopa or Copan, as part of that, gave out a gift box, and it had the Lama that was there for like 40 years, his ashes in a
Lama
little,
Lundup. That's Lama Lundup, the abbot of the monastery. That's right.
Thank you. Apologies for not with the names.
No worries.
And I saw the monks wear it, so I've always worn it apart from in the shower. But could you tell me what's the point of wearing it?
Well, let me see it. I want to see it. Show it to me. I'll see if you're on the speaker. Let me have a look at it. Can it closer to the camera? Oh, it's an image. It's a tsatsar. It's a little statue, isn't it?
It's the ashes.
No, I know,
It's
but
the
turn it
ashes.
around. I know, darling, but turn it around. It's a little statue, isn't it? It's a little statue, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
That's what I'm saying before. That's exactly right. So the point is this. Okay, now I see it. It's fine. Now I see it. So what it is, as I said before, one of the marvelous things that you can do, let's say your ashes or somebody else's, and they've done it with him, they had the ashes blessed, and then they mixed it with clay, and they mixed it and made these little Buddha images. That's all. That's what they've done. So why is it? Because it's an amazing blessing for you to, any Buddha image that you look at and see every day, and it's been blessed, it can only give you a blessing as well. That's the whole idea of it. It's the same as having the Buddhas up on your wall, it's exactly the same, but you can wear it because that's often it's like the Catholics have these things called scapula. Did you know about that? Catholics had a similar thing. It's because it's been blessed with the energy of the Buddhas and it's a Buddha image, it's said to be very blessed. That's it. So touching your body can be beneficial. It's like hearing, touching it, or hearing the sounds of mantra, touching it, having it touch your body. This is one of the practices they recommend we do.
Okay, thanks, Robina.
Good, David.
Thank you.
Thanks, sweetheart. What else, people?
A question here from Pia. Pia asks, question on sleeping yoga. There is still a moment at waking where I'm not immediately waking in the form of Vajrayogini. How do I bridge that gap between immediate waking and arising in the form of the deity?
Pierre, I think the long-term answer is to get your single-pointed concentration, meditate in the sadhana with the Vajrayogini, as you're saying. It's got all the different stages, but the more you are able to get concentration, and then you transform the 3 stages. The first, you go through the stages of what you would go through if you were dying, but that's what you do when you go to sleep. You've got to get concentration, basically, Pierre. You've got to get in charge of the process, and that means you need single-pointed concentration. So then you practice in your sadhana, doing all those 11 stages of the Vajrayogini sadhana, as you know, and you go through these stages. As you get more sophisticated in your concentration, you will actually go through the stages of death, and then you'll manifest as the Dharmakaya at the time you go to sleep. And then when you wake up in the dream, you'll manifest as the deities, as the Sambhogakaya. And then when you wake up into life, and you'll manifest as Vajrayogini. You fake it till you make it first, but you've got to practice the entire thing, which means getting concentration. There's no shortcut.
Okay.
You've got to be in charge, in other words, of the entire process. That's what the greatest yogis have got. Were you here yesterday? Were you talking to me?
Yes.
So you heard me say yesterday about death is what the yogis have been. They're completely in control because they've got their concentration. But if you do your sadhana perfectly, like Lama Zopa says, and you go through those different stages of transforming each of the different bodies, then it'll be programmed in your mind, honey. And when you die, you'll be able to do it. It'll be brilliant,
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm still in my fake it till you make it stage.
Yeah, that's it, darling. And this is, fake it till you make it. It's called practice.
Yeah.
No complaints, just keep doing it every day, sweetheart. Perfect. Perfect. You've got your sadhana. It's perfect. You've got your method, it's great. Yeah. Thanks, Pia. Thanks, darling. What else, people? Anything?
There's no more questions in the chat at the moment, but if anyone else wanted to ask, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Okay. So if there's no more.
Look, I'll just unmute myself for a quick one.
Okay. Yes, darling.
Hi, darling. Okay. Just this applies to both Australia and to the US. There is a living will possibility. And I think it's...
Talk about that. Yeah, talk about that, Jay. It's good.
You want me to talk about it, or do you want to talk about it?
Lama Zopa doesn't talk about it in his book, but in a way he's doing like that because you prepare exactly. But, let's talk about how you formalize what your wishes are. It's a really good point. Tell us
I think it is important to formalize, because if something happens where you can't articulate it... That's
right. Yes.
Or somebody around for you can't do it, if you've got that available, they do need to pay attention to it. So
talk about what the process is.
Sorry?
Explain it to people. Some people don't know what it means. I didn't know what it meant until someone told me.
An advanced care directive or living will is where you specify how you want your end of life care to be. And you would also put in there issues around your health. I do or do not want to have comfort care for my issues, which would mean if I put down comfort care, that cues them in, you want to be highly medicated. If I say I don't want it, it gives them some idea about what you're actually wanting. I do want to be resuscitated. I don't want to be resuscitated. You can put those kinds of things in there. I don't, personally, I would put in, I don't want people laughing and joking in my room. Yeah. So you can be quite particular.
Go on, Jay.
You can be quite specific. You can also Google this. It's available. Advanced Care Directive in Australia is readily available on the internet, a copy of it.
Good.
Okay.
Good. So I suppose the point of this book, this is the point of Lama Zopa's book. It's, the advice that's given obviously is for a person to practice themselves, but clearly the way Lama Zopa's entire book is that we as a helper would be the one who would help the person navigate the weeks and the months and the days and the hours and the afterward. So that would all be taken care of by the helper. But of course, there's nothing, we absolutely cannot guarantee we'll have a helper. And we, so it's actually excellent that we do show all this, and using all the advice that Rinpoche gives, we can incorporate that into our living will. I think it's a great idea. Absolutely. And also the point is too, I know some friends of mine who've died, and the people who helped them, there's all this, they're all students of Lama Zopa, so they're all on the same page, but each one was quite different because some needed more help, some wanted less help. One of the nuns, she was very independent. She didn't want people reading her prayers to her. The other nun did want the prayers read to her. So these are much more fine details of, especially for a Buddhist one, So even then you have to find out from the person. And as Lama Zopa says, you've got to know the person's mind. You've got to know what's best for that person through all these small details, But yes, it is a really good point. Rinpoche, of course, doesn't talk about this, but it's implied, if you like, in the advice he gives. But yes, to make it. But then I'm always puzzled, though, let's say, but how do I Do I have to wear it on my body all the time in case I die in a car accident or in a cafe or walking down the street? I'm not being sarcastic here, Jay. How would you handle that?
One of the things that we do is particularly, I would have one with my GP. I would have one with my friends. I would also have one if I end up in a nursing home. I would have one with them. I'd have it spread around as much as possible. And, you know, if you really feel vulnerable, you could carry one on your person.
I mean, because I mean,
They're
the way
not that big.
No, it wouldn't. And also, it could be on a stick, couldn't it? On a UBS.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because I mean, you don't know how you're going to die. It mightn't be an ideal death. Maybe you just die in a bus or something. So it's good to have something on you. No, that's interesting. Okay, good. All right, this is helpful. Thank you. This is really good. Thanks, Jane. What else, people?
Could I just add something to that? Might answer your question, Robina.
Yeah, David.
You can put on your phone a thing. You just put the initials like a contact ICE in ICE in case of emergency, and they can access that when your mobile phone is unlocked. So let's say I chose Jason, and then I would put in my mobile phone Jason mobile number, and then he's got the copy of the advanced health directive. So that way you don't need to carry it all the time.
Because everyone has their phone, don't they? People tend to have their phone.
Yeah, they just go into your phone like they do, like getting your medical record, and they ring up Jason and go, oh, we found this person, he's been in an accident or he's sick or whatever. And then Jason would know immediately what to start doing.
Perfect. You better not put that on in America, because ICE is the name of the immigrant police organization. So you'd be in trouble. They get sent to the wrong one. I'm just joking. That's really good. Thanks, David. That's helpful. So what else, people? Anything more? Got a whole hour for this session still. Any more questions? Because much comes out of questions. That's what I've found. Because in a way, we've covered the book. We've done everything. We can certainly do more. But I want to hear some questions. If there aren't any, that's fine. So one section is called what to meditate on, and there's all these different levels of meditation. Another one is what meditations to do for purification, and all of that too is related to the person and their level of practice and what they need and so on and so forth, you know. But the one meditation to do would be, Rinpoche's got a very simple guided meditation that you can read out to your loved one that takes them through these 8 stages, and we can do it oneself as well. It's very helpful. So let's just become familiar with that process, you know. That's of course for a person who's committed to the Buddhist view of the world. If you're not sure yet, you wouldn't do it. It's too weird, you know. There's so many good meditation, so many kinds of meditations that you could easily guide. That would either that, you know, because many of them are ones you need to guide for the person, and this is something very consoling for some people, just to have you reading out these lovely meditations or reading out certain prayers, you know. So important, because when you're dying and when you're sick, you can't hold your mind very strong, isn't it? And have a person that you love and trust. But that's the other person. That's the point as well. All of this advice in Rinpoche's book is addressed to the person who's in charge of the process. You've got to be the boss. Like I said yesterday, if you're just the sister who has about the fifth option to make decisions, there's nothing much you can do. You know, like just now, Lakshmi mentioned somebody of a friend is dying. So you're not the one who makes all the decisions. So if you are the one who makes the decisions, it's a really powerful job to do, you know. So you got to know the person well. They've got to really like you. I mean, they've got to like you. If they can't stand you, well, keep out of their way, please. Don't force it. Or don't be like, this is so funny. One man, Buddhists, they were Buddhists, and the husband and the wife were Buddhists, and the wife was sick and dying. And the husband was so fanatic, he'd wake her up every 2 hours and make her do her prayers. I mean, the poor woman was exhausted. Leave the woman alone, for God's sake. Do her prayers for her. Give her a break, you know. You've got to be so gentle with people, because, I mean, when you're dying, your mind is so fragile, so sensitive. That was awful, I thought. Or do all that horrible thing like have fights. But that's the point I was saying before, when you have the Buddhist view that even if they're unconscious, even in a coma, it's so important to make it so peaceful and quiet for the whole 3 days. When the mind, the gross mind has ceased, the subtle mind is still there. It's like a shrine room. Only prayers should be heard in that scenario. You know, they do that in the monasteries. You can do that if you bring your friends coming. I know Miffy in Queensland, who's the SPC there, the spiritual program coordinator of the Brisbane Centre. when her mummy died. Her mummy ran the center there. Now Miffy is the spiritual program coordinator. This is like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I think 30 years ago. So she had she kept the body for 3 days. And she wrote about it later. It was very, very inspiring, you know. And different people come all the time saying mantras, saying prayers for Incha, for the mother. And for your cat as well, your dog as well. So that's one that, you know, I think we have to talk about karma. That's right. We do need to talk about karma in more detail, I think. Because you haven't asked in this particular case, you guys haven't asked. One of the commonest ones to ask is about killing your animals, you know, or as we call it, putting them down. Or, you know, what about euthanasia? I can't remember if you have asked, but let's talk about this one. And that means we have to understand how karma works. It's pretty basic, it's pretty technical. So in general, like I've been saying, the Buddhist view is, the broad Buddhist view is that our own consciousness, because you, again, remember, Buddha doesn't use the word soul, like Bruna and I brought up as Catholics. We know we have a body, we have a mind, and if we're materialists, we know that's the brain. But then we have this other special part of us that God gave us at conception. God put the soul there. There's no view like that in Buddhism, you know. And also the other point, this is now me mentioning earlier, there's 2 points now, I'll go to this other point first. This, you know, it's just for Bruna's sake, because she was a Catholic like I was. So, as I said, all these different people all over the planet coming up with similar findings. It's so fascinating. So the point is, interestingly, in Buddhism, you hear, oh, Buddha doesn't believe in God, we'll say. So we sort of think he must be a communist or something. No, he's not a materialist at all. Buddha still asserts something, I'll go into the other business later. Buddha still asserts something not physical, but he doesn't call it a soul. He calls it consciousness or mind. These words are synonymous. But the point for Buddhism is that the word mind or consciousness refers, first of all, to all the gross thoughts, all the concepts, the thoughts up in the head, the brain aspect, all the feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, even what you think of as like your spirit or your soul, this more subtle level. So it's not that Buddha's not saying there's not something there. He is, but he doesn't use that word soul as a separate thing that comes from God. That's the view that's fundamentally different. He says we've all got a consciousness, and as I'm describing, when we go through the death process, it goes from the gross to the subtle to the very subtle, and the very subtle level of consciousness, we know when any of us die, that very subtle consciousness, that's what the Christians would call the soul, basically. It will carry on. You know, but no, that's just subtle consciousness for the Buddhist view. And it happens to be the repository of all the karmic imprints of everything you've ever said and done and thought. You know, it's just a natural process for the Buddhist view, this view of karma. It's not some kind of thing like punishment or reward, and then there's a judgment day and you get punished and sent to hell and you get rewarded and sent to heaven. There's no view like that. Your mind is programmed with your own actions of body, speech, and mind. So you produce your own future life. It's a pretty interesting concept. So this doesn't mean, so then where do you think, so then you think, well, you know, if you've come from being a Catholic and you say you're not an atheist, then what's the function of Buddha? Well, that's the point. It's very interesting. So Buddha also has the term superior being. Now, you know, interestingly, this is now for Bruna, in Melbourne a few years ago, I went to a convent. I mean, it's in the southeast part of Melbourne. It was in Glen Iris. It's one of the Sacred Heart nuns. I know you didn't go to the nuns, Bruna, but I went to the Sacred Heart nuns, and so did Pia. Pia in Sydney went to the same nuns. We're both old girls. They call themselves old. We called ourselves the old girls, Sacred Heart old girls. Me and Pia. So anyway, Bruna, I went to this Catholic convent. What was I saying now? Oh, that's right. I gave a talk. So a friend of mine, I still go to the reunions. I'm now very soon going to go to my 70th reunion. Not 70th. That can't be right. 60th maybe. I'm 76. So what does that mean? Maybe the 60th. I left school when I was 16. That's right, 60th. That'll be this year, I think, if I'm in Melbourne. Maybe next year. I can't remember. Anyway, the point is, they asked me to give this talk at the Melbourne University, which is in Fitzroy. So I had a 20-minute slot to talk about something, this Buddhist nun, right, at this Catholic conference. And even the morning I arrived, Bruna, I didn't know, and Pia, I didn't know what to talk about. So I looked up the dictionary, literally, for the definition of God. And then I thought, that's interesting. So the definition of God, this as they say in Christian, this energy that pervades the universe, that knows everything, that sees everything, has infinite compassion, has infinite power, and is the creator of the universe. Well, the first part of that definition, Buddhism agrees. That's called a Buddha. All-knowing, all-compassionate, all-wise, pervades the universe. But the difference is the Christians say that energy creates the rest of the world and is the first cause. The Buddha says, no, you don't need a first cause. Your mind goes back and back, and you become a Buddha. Everybody can become a superior being. Everybody can become totally enlightened. That's the major difference, Bruna, between God and Buddha. Can you hear that point, Bruna? You hear me? It's an interesting point, you know. And some people, even some Christians, like that idea. It's kind of curious. They're not shocked by it, you know. Because if you were to say to a devoted Catholic, you can become God, that's too shocking. That is a very shocking concept. But you can see that similar. I mean, Pia's got some experience even from Islam as well. And if you look at the more esoteric Catholics and Christians and the more esoteric Muslims and the more esoteric Buddhists, they all agree. I mean, I know Dalai Lama, one time he's got these Catholic priest friends, and I know he has these wonderful meetings with them, and they all have such a way of communicating. In fact, I remember one story I've got in 1982. Lama Yeshe invited the Dalai Lama to Europe, to our different centers there, and Lama was the most outrageous person, and he's very radical. So he invited 10 of us, 5 girls and 5 boys, to be security guards for the Dalai Lama. Can you imagine? And I was one of the girls. I felt I'd won the lottery. I couldn't believe it, you know. It was in 1982. So he made us all get dressed up in little uniforms. And this is so curious, Pia. I don't know how you got girls dressed in Sydney. She went to Sydney one, I went to the Melbourne one. But we had, you know, in our school, we had tartan skirts, yellow blouse, and a maroon twin set. Well, you know, Lama Yeshe made us get dressed up like that. We had the 5 girls had this little uniform. I was a nun, but he made us wear lay clothes. So my friend Susanna in Milan, we began in Italy. So she took me shopping for these lovely knee-length, nice maroon leather boots. I wore lipstick. I had hair then. I was still a nun, but I thought I better look like a lady, you know. I had a nice lipstick, and I had this nice little maroon jacket, this yellow blouse, and a nice little tartan skirt. I looked like a Sacré-Cœur girl, Pia. It was so funny. So we traveled around with the Dalai Lama, 5 men and 5 girls, and the 5 boys were dressed up. They're all Swiss. It's kind of ironic, Swiss guards, and they wore grey slacks, navy jackets and maroon tie and a white shirt. We looked all really proper, but I also wore lipstick. So every time, because I had hair, so every time Lama Yeshe saw me, he would laugh because I was a nun. He said, "Oh, I think I like you better like that," he said. It was very funny, you know. So anyway, we traveled around with the Dalai Lama. It was amazing. So both in Spain, on the aeroplanes, at his hotel, you know, I remember all the local governments would always send, you know, the local police as respectful. And so in Pisa, we got a big center in Brunei in Pisa, and near Pisa, 50 kilometers away. And so the local cops in Pisa, we have a big center there, and the Dalai Lama was there for about 10 days, or about 700 people. And then they sent the local terrorist squad cops, these young 27-year-old Italian boys, you know, with their machine gun over their shoulders, and they were guarding the house. And there were these hippie-looking Western guards, including a girl. Can you imagine? I mean, like I was 40 or something, whatever. They were so cynical, and they'd see the Dalai Lama. They were so cynical. But by the end of the 10 days, he had them in the palm of his hand. I tell you, they loved him, you know. And everywhere you went, he had a meeting with the Pope. He had a meeting with, he went to a couple of monasteries. He loves going to these monasteries. So especially in Spain, he went to one, and it was the monasteries of the Carthusian monks, who are these super strict monks who pray every 3 hours, sleep about 1 hour a day. They're in total silence. These amazing yogis, you know. So all I know is the boys, the 5 guard boys were allowed to go in. We 5 girls weren't allowed in. That's okay. That's their laws. I can't help it. So we hung out outside in these mountains, this monastery, and the Dalai Lama and Lama Yeshe went in with the other boys and a few students. And they came out, and these monks, these white, with their lovely white robes, they were blissed out with this conversation with the Dalai Lama. They were just so blissed out. And the 5 guard boys said the questions they were asking were just so beautiful. And they just loved the Dalai Lama. There was so much good communication about the more esoteric things, and so much, it was just blissful to see them, you know. And I've seen this so many times. The Dalai Lama was invited back in 1992, I think, in London. He had a very close Catholic monk friend, and this priest, a priest in one of the local parishes in London, he invited the Dalai Lama to give a teaching on the Gospels. So these Catholics, I read about it in the local Catholic paper, And they said these Catholics who went to this teaching, a 5-day teaching by the Dalai Lama about the Gospels, they were in tears hearing their own teachings from this Buddhist monk. They were blown out by it. So, you know, when you look at it from that point of view, there's so much similarity. And that's the Dalai Lama's expertise. He brings everybody together. He makes sure, you know, that there's common ground. He does it with the scientists. He does it with all the you know, with the philosophy. He's amazing. And it was just so moving to see this. And this is why I'm saying there's so many things. Me from being an old Catholic, Bruna, I mean, I went to Catholic convent until I was 15. I went to Mass till I was 19. I was completely in love with God. I loved Our Lady and the saints. I wanted to be a nun. Okay, I was the naughtiest girl in the school, but inside me, I loved God, and I loved going to my Catholic convent, even though the nuns were really strict. So there's, I mean, for me, then I became a hippie, then I kind of became a radical lefty and a communist and a feminist. Then I came back to Buddha, up to something spiritual again when I was like 31. And it was just so much, there was so much familiarity for me, you know, in my way of interpreting it, so much familiarity. The philosophical views fundamentally different, like not God, but Buddha, but superior being, pervades the universe. The teachings of compassion, so much similarity, you know, it's very interesting. I wanted to say that point. So the other point I wanted to say, which I've now forgotten. I can't remember. But maybe in relation to this, let me say something, the point I just said, because many people feel they got it. I mean, there's a Dalai Lama bringing people together, but he's never being wishy-washy. He's not being like, he's not trying to create a new, what's that language they talk about that no one ever talks? Esperanto. He's not trying to create an Esperanto of religion. He's very clear there are similarities, but he's very clear there are differences, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having differences, you know? So anyway, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, but my talk at the Catholic University for the 20 minutes was the similarity between the definition of God and Buddha. I'm not sure if the Catholics liked it, but that was my talk in the end. So there are similarities, which is great. But in the end, Bruna, and you might find this or you might not, I've got no idea. And we all came from another view. You know, every one of us Buddhists in the West, we weren't Buddhist born. We came to it from being Christians. We came to it from being Jewish, you know. We came to it from being secular. But one of the things is, in the end, I'm seeing, I mean, I try to find ways to bring these things together too, to talk about, but I'm always for me, it's so important to make the differences, to be clear. Karma is a very specific philosophical view that's described in incredible detail in the text and has been even before the Buddha, these Indians before him. So it's not trying to just be wishy-washy and make it all sound the same, because it's not the same, but it's good to see the similarities as well. But in the end, it helps us to find where we are coming from, to find our own way, to find our own path, not have a worry to try and make it all nice and same. That's kind of a bit naive, I think. That's just a thing. And that's Pia's experience as well. I'm just saying this to Pia too, you know. Because Pia came from being a Buddhist to a Muslim, and then she's back to her Buddhism, you know. So this is where, once we're clear in ourselves, I mean, for me, I'm studying Buddhism this last 45 years or whatever. I'm super clear I'm a Buddhist. There's no doubt in my mind I'm a Buddhist. But the more I study it, the more it's helped me find a doorway into understanding my Catholic upbringing. And that's what I find very helpful. So it doesn't mean I'm a Catholic. I mean, in a way, I am a Catholic, hippie, communist, feminist, Buddhist. I am that. I can't throw any part of myself out. But it's all become subsumed, you know, for me, in the label Buddhist, but there's no contradiction. Of course I'm a feminist. And if you like, of course I'm a communist. Of course I am, in some sense. Of course I'm a hippie. Of course I'm a Catholic. But the label that defines me, and I'm comfortable with that, is Buddhist, you know. I'm just talking away some things. Maybe some questions now from all what I just chatted about. Any thoughts, people?
We have a couple of questions here about praying for people in the bardo.
Good.
So Rosemary is asking, when we're saying prayers for people who are in the bardo, what should we say? And how exactly does that help their mind in the bardo experience?
Well, I don't think, Rosemary, the broader question is, how does prayer help anybody? Bardo or not bardo, what's the difference? Whether if you're living in San Francisco and you're praying from Melbourne, or whether the person's in a bardo and you're praying from Melbourne, there's no difference. The question is, your broader question, I would suggest, Rosemary, is how does prayer help? Would you agree with that broader point, Rosemary,
yeah, no, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so let me answer it then. Okay. This really takes us time because we get very, I'm not saying Rosemary's confused. I'm not saying that. We have a certain concept of what prayer is, especially if we've been brought up as a Christian, you know, or a Muslim for that matter. So I think it's important to, I thought I was going to talk about karma. That's right. I was going to talk about karma. We need to. Euthanasia. That's right. Knocking off your pets and everything, or knocking off your grandma, one or the other. So I'm going to go to that one. But I think in a way, this also answers the question, is part of the question. When we understand this Buddhist view, which most of us as Buddhists don't go into that deeply. We tend just to say, oh, I believe in karma. We haven't really studied it properly. And the more we study it properly, the more we'll understand it's just this natural process that occurs every millisecond in our mind. Basically, the Buddhist view is that every millisecond of what we think and feel and then do and say on the basis of what we think and feel, that's the process of quote unquote creating karma. Karma just means actions, but it starts with mental action, and that's intention. Intention is volition. And that really, and there's all these different parts of the mind, and Buddhists, they go quite deeply into it. Many parts of the mind all working together to have our moment by moment experiences. And it's highly technical how it actually works. It's like learning botany. You've got to learn the techniques of exactly what goes on. You can know botany in general. You can have faith in botany because you can see it works. But to really be a good botanist, you have to study the details of botany. It's exactly the same here. So to really be in control of the process of what your mind and body and speech do, and then being clear about the seeds you plant in your mind so that you can ensure that you'll get a decent future because you're creating yourself, basically, you need to learn the details. It's pretty simple. So in general, that's a really crucial point. So then, okay, so now, so where does prayer, I'm going to go to that more later still. So where does prayer fit? So prayer, actually, often the meaning of prayer in Buddhism is aspiration. I mean, you know, every Saturday we do this, you know, as some of you might know, we do this particular prayer written by this one Lama a few centuries ago when there was some big pandemic in a monastery. And just by doing these various verses and doing different compassion mantra, he was able to heal the monastery. So the Lama Zopa's got us all, as you must know, us monks and nuns around the world have been doing it for many months now. And we're going to continue to do it, he said, until COVID-19 finishes. Hope the world catches up with Australia soon. And then, so we 24 hours, every 30 minutes, some of us do longer, we do a session, and it's on YouTube, and we do 24 hours around the entire 24 hours every Saturday, we do this particular prayer. So if you look at those verses, every verse, may beings not suffer from this, may all beings be happy, may this, may that. It's may, it's an aspiration, may. Another prayer is, you know, please. So now we think, well, if Buddha's not a creator, I wonder why we pray. What are you asking him to do? Because the usual concept we have of a prayer is God, who is the boss, who is the creator, and I'm not complaining. And you ask God to do something. Now, that's why a lot of the non-Catholics don't like the saints. They think we're the Catholics gave too much power to the saints, you know, because they don't have much power. But we all know the Catholics love all their saints. That's very similar to the Tibetan Buddhist one, all these different bodhisattvas, right? So the point is, what is the benefit of prayer? Okay, let me now use the point. This is the point now. I'm always saying this is the point, but it is the point. Hang on, I've got to blow my nose again. Okay, so there's Rosemary, who's decided she wants to become a Buddha. And what drives her to become a Buddha is her incredible compassion for sentient beings. So the analogy would be Rosemary's decided to become a doctor. And what drives Rosemary to become a doctor is because she's got incredible compassion for suffering sentient beings. That's a good analogy, Rosemary, okay? So now, what you're doing every second when you're working on those bodies and you're cutting up and learning about anatomy and you're learning about these diseases and all the time, every day you wake up, you're motivated by the thought, I'm going to learn all these things so I can become a Buddha or become a doctor. So now let's say you become the best doctor on the whole planet. So now why did you become a doctor? Because you want to help others. But now what are you going to do, Rosemary? Put a little sign up on your door and say, I'm a doctor, you know, and put up and dispense a few Band-Aids. People have got to come, and you can't just, no, on the other hand, you can't just go barging out. Hey, I'm a doctor, I can heal you, and you sort of shove it down their throats. No, that's very rude. What you do is people have to know about you, and then people have to come and knock on your door, and I will say, please, Rosemary, I've heard you're a good doctor. Will you please heal my disease? And then what you will do is you won't heal my disease, but you will give me medicine. And I will have faith in you because I've checked up on your reputation. I will say, please, Rosemary, give me medicine. That's a prayer, Rosemary. That's a prayer. So the Buddhas are these infinitely powerful beings who pervade the universe, whose only job is to help. So by asking them, they're going to come running, whether you're in the bardo or next door. Their job is to know your mind, and their job. So by asking, one, I create the virtue of asking the Buddha to help me, and that helps me get closer to Buddhism, to becoming a Buddha. But also it's interdependent. A Buddha you've got all the qualities able to heal anybody on the planet. But then what if nobody comes and asks you? Your hands are tied. You can't go outside and start bullying them. You need people to ask you. It's dependent arising. So the asking and requesting to the Buddhas to help is a major function of our prayer, a major one, and it's reasonable. But you do the work. And asking for helping others. Why not? Does that make sense so far, Rosemary?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've never heard it explained so clearly before, even by you. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. But I'll tell you a lovely story. This is really the active example of how these holy beings manifest. And there's all these stories like this in Christianity as well. My friend Harry, who's a meditator, he's 4 hours north of here is a place called, what's it called, Sharky? What's it called in Colorado? They say it's like Tibet.
Crestone.
Thank you, Crestone. Okay, it's about 4 hours from here. We went one time. And our friends Harry and Mary, they've both been meditators all their lives. They've had caves up in Nepal, and now they've got a little house in Crestone, and Mary's starting her 3-year retreat very soon. Harry spent his life in retreat. He's an amazing being. So anyway, he was in Kolpan at our monastery around the 90s, and he was getting ready before mobile phones anyway. And he was getting ready, packing his bag and getting ready to walk up the mountains again, about 10 days up into where the Sherpas live, and where he had a cave where Lama Zopa's from his past life, our teacher, Lama Zopa, he's from there. So Harry was getting ready to go off to his retreat again. He does, sometimes 3 years, 4-year retreats in his little cave. He's a very amazing meditator. So anyway, he was getting ready and then he left. But then Lama Zopa said he had a dream. Lama Zopa is our teacher, some of you know, and he's there. And he said he had a dream that Harry would die, because these walks up those mountains are very treacherous. We've led a couple of treks up there, and I mean, you can easily fall off. I nearly fell off. I'm knocked over by a yak, someone saved me luckily, but you can easily fall off. And all these porters, they're really intense how they carry all these 60-kilo packs on their back, with their heads, with their head bent double. All they can do is see their feet for 10 days. So these big packs. So anyway, Harry's got ready with his 20-kilo pack, and he's got another friend with him from behind, and they're walking up the hill. Lama Zopa, I jumped ahead. Lama Zopa said Lama Zopa said, get a message to Harry. He had a dream that he'd die. Well, anyway, first of all, Lama Zopa doesn't sleep. He's a meditator day and night. He's a holy being. So he can't have had a dream. He's just being polite. He was clairvoyant. Clairvoyance in Buddhism, as we must know, is nothing. It's like we all need it eventually. And when we've got this incredible meditation technique under our belt called single point of concentration, like I mentioned to Pia, that's when your mind is more, you get to a more subtle level of your mind, and you're really much more advanced, and you can see the past, you can see the future. You're super powerful now. This has been around for 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, this technique, We're only learning about it now in the West. So anyway, Lama Zopa doesn't sleep. He's a holy being, so he must have been clairvoyant. So anyway, Harry had already left, and obviously it was before mobiles. So then Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, this amazing yogi who spent years up in the mountains, naked, no food, no sleep, living in these caves, becoming a Buddha. He lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, this amazing female Buddha. He lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, Lama Zopa said. He's this wonderful old monk. He's passed away now. Anyway, he was living at Kolpan at that time, very humble, unassuming, great yogi, but very humble. Nobody could tell. So Lama Zopa asked Harry to ask Geshe Lama Kontrog to pray for Harry. So this is the story. I heard this later. The nun who was with him must have told the story. So I asked Harry to verify the story. So this is roughly what happened. The normal track was there'd been an avalanche, so they had to take a very dangerous track. It's like a huge, like 300, 500 meter drop, and a really narrow, treacherous path. And there are these Sherpa porters coming. Suddenly he's at a certain point, very narrow, walking up, and these 4 Sherpas walking down. And they've got their big packs on their back, and it's super treacherous. I mean, even if it's wide, there's 2 people on it, you can still fall over. So these guys with their packs, and the 4 of them walking down, very intense, very close. And the first thought that arose in Harry's mind was, okay, 4 of them, 1 of me, I'll step to the side. So he spent years in meditation, and many of these meditations they do on compassion is to try and make this incredible kind of shift in the mind where they really learn. It's like the Christians call saints. In Tibetan, in Sanskrit, they call a bodhisattva, an amazing person who's made this incredible shift from years and years of hard practice when they're truly full of compassion for other beings. Not just occasionally, but they've truly realized this level of compassion. So Harry, there's this happy fellow. Anybody who ever knows Harry always says, oh, Harry's a bodhisattva. Harry's a bodhisattva. Like saying Harry's a saint. He's just this nice fellow. He's like, it reminds you of Father Christmas. So I'd always think, well, yeah, who knows? But then I heard this story. I figured, I bet you Harry sounds like a saint. He sounds like a bodhisattva to me. Because what happened was, the moment he saw these 4 Sherpas, and he spent years in meditation on compassion, and now he puts his money where his mouth is. So these 4 Sherpas walking down, and he sees it's so narrow, it's so intense, I'll step to the side. So he stepped close to the edge of the cliff. Then the next thought he had, he said, if they knock me, I won't hold on. He's not being a drama queen. He's just quietly in his own mind. Now think about this. If you hadn't done years and years of meditation, years and years of serious spiritual practice, you wouldn't just naturally do that. You'd have a panic attack and you'd lean against the cliff and hope they don't all fall off, you know. So then they knocked him by accident, of course. The whole thing happened so quickly. And then he said this. He said, my feet were on the ground. I was falling. My pack was pulling me. And he said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. And I saw my body crash to the ground. Then he said, he felt the hands of Geshe Lama Kontrok, this amazing yogi, forcefully pushing him, and he reversed direction and he fell into the path. And so this nun was with him, she reported. So now that's the power of the holy beings. That's the power of holy beings, you know. The Buddha's talking about that, how we've all got this incredible capability to develop ourselves to the fullness of infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, infinite everything, life after life after life. And then when you become this Buddha, you only want to benefit others. It's very fascinating. So that story I find very powerful. So you would say that Harry didn't pray. Harry's own incredible bodhicitta is incredible compassion. Now, this is the point now, Patricia, though, Rosemary. Geshe Lama Kontrok is like the doctor, but he just had to be asked once by Lama Zopa, and he went running, baby. You get my point? They don't need to be asked all the time because they're very clever, but the asking is part of the interdependent dynamic of it, and we all benefit from the asking. We all connect. We're all connected, you know. Do you understand, darling?
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, sweetheart. What else, people?
There was a similar question, I think, from Rosie, who's asking about mantras. And Rosie says, I'm curious about the idea of our deities that embody what we want to aspire to, as opposed to a god that people may supplicate to or worship. So why, if as a Buddhist, we don't believe in a power outside ourselves, do we ask the deities in a mantra like Vajrasattva to please guide us or please stabilize our happiness?
I think everything in your question is perfect, and I think I've answered it. But the only misconception I would say that suggested by your words is that there's no power outside us. Of course, there's a power outside us. It's called Buddha. Of course, there's a power outside us. A person, in other words, you know, it's like saying just because you become a musician, you become Buddha. That's like saying your music teacher is no power outside you. There's a music teacher outside you, darling. And how do you become a music teacher? How to become a musician yourself? By asking your music teacher. How do I become a Buddha? By having Buddhas outside there. There are billions of beings who become Buddha. Their job is to go around the universe benefiting people. They never stop, but they're not creators. That's the misconception.
Thank you.
So you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater by assuming if there's no creator, there's no outside power. Of course there's an outside power. If you're in grade 5 music and you're a grade 10 teacher, that's an outside power, baby, but you're going to get to grade 10 as well. And then you become the outside power for someone else, but you've got to do the work. The only reason you have a teacher is so that you can become that yourself. The function of a Buddha is definitely outside of millions of people that become Buddhas. So does that help, Trish? I'm not sure. What do you think? Was it Trish you asked her? Rosie.
Yes. Yeah. I just wondered, why we, and it's a bit like praying, I guess. So you're sending those thoughts and desires for ourselves and for others out to the universe, to those Buddhas that are there. And yeah, it just confounded me a little bit that they actually, that energy is actually heard, or I don't know what the right words are, heard or
Right.
taken.
So based on what I said, the earlier story, did that help you understand some of those points, or are you still confused by it, Rosie?
Yes, I need to integrate that now. It was a fantastic story, and I really, listened.
Okay, but another thing, Rosie, I know when I first started wanting a spiritual path again after I'd been an old radical lefty, that was back in the 70s, and I heard about transcendental meditation. So I did TM, right? And I remember that even for a while, I remember reading, and they even say that now, if more than, 1% or 10% or 3% or something of people all in the same place, all doing particular prayers and mantras, that shifts the energy in that place. So Rosie, I think this is something we can all see. I mean, keep it real simple. If you're in a group of 10, you're in a group of 10 people, and those 10 people are feeling friendly and loving and kind, don't you say, isn't there a lovely feeling in the room? Wouldn't you say that?
Absolutely, yes.
Now look what happens when they start fighting, Rosie.
Yes.
But it's fairly obvious. If you've got a group of people all angry in a certain neighborhood, you're going to have a bad vibes everywhere. It's going to impact upon everybody. And this is the meaning of interdependence. Everything is dependent on something else. Nothing exists in isolation. So prayer, having a thought, even just a thought, may all beings be happy. Now, that doesn't magically mean they will be happy, but first of all, it purifies your mind. It makes you strong. It makes you develop compassion, and then that can impact on another person you meet. So it has impact around us. And so if everybody's doing that, it's going to have a profound effect on the world. And then you can get all the beings who are the Buddhas, who've actually become Buddha, who are real people who've become Buddha. Then you're connecting with them and aspiring to be like them and requesting them to use their power to benefit others. It's like asking the doctor to heal. If these Buddhas, you give them an inch and they'll take 1,000 miles. They will do everything they can. Are you getting my point, Rosie? It's
yes, I do.
It's not there's no outside power. Don't conflate outside power with creator. There's no creator, but there's plenty of outside power, baby. They're called Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and holy beings. Do you understand, darling?
Yes, I do. And thank you for that. That's cleared that up for me beautifully.
I'm very happy. Thank you, Rosie. That's a very common point, both your point and Rosemary's. It's very interesting. And I think that's the point. As soon as we hear because we assume that prayer is only to a creator. That's quite a puzzle for us to think why. And then we assume that the function of prayer and the function of creator are fairly set in stone. So as soon as you hear Buddha's not a creator, we then think he's a communist. Why would you do prayer then? Because we assume, so it's a misconception about what prayer is, and it's a misconception, even as Rosie put it, of an external power. The world is full of external beings, good and bad power, Yeah, it's a good point. What else?
Just one final one on the Harry story and prayer. So Catherine's asking, so if Lama Zopa intervened on Harry's behalf, does that then mean that Harry must have prayed for Lama Zopa to take care of him and keep him from danger?
I would say there's no question. It's much more intricate and more nuanced than that, but essentially, yes. But the key point, I would say, it's like this. First of all, Lama Zopa has the power himself to do this. But somehow they're all kind of playing their role. They're all like playing in a movie, and they're all playing out their own role. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche is as powerful, if not more powerful, than Geshe Lama Kontrog. But somehow it's just different karmic connections with different things. It's just kind of curious, So, and even the fact that Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, it showed it was something externalized. If Harry had just said, oh, Lama Zopa, if Lama Zopa, let's say, said nothing, and I'm thinking out loud now, if Lama Zopa with his clairvoyance can see that Harry would die, so he could easily have done exactly that job himself, but he put it out there and he said, please ask Geshe Lama Kontrog to pray. And then who turns up for Harry is Geshe Lama Kontrog. Now, if Lama Zopa turned up, you wouldn't believe Harry, but this is almost like helping you believe it's true, because we know that Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, so there you go. So he popped up, So in a way, they're all working together to help sentient beings, in a way. That's one way I want to say it. But the other one is Harry, the main cause for Harry to be helped is his own incredible practice, his own incredible compassion, without a second thought to want to happily give his life for somebody else, That was one of the powerful catalysts that caused Geshe Lama Kontrog to be there. That's This is one that's a bit hard to understand because we tend to think, well, surely Geshe-la conscious would help anybody. It's not if you have to deserve it first. It's more that you've got to create the cause to be helped. Anyway, I don't know if I'm explaining things clearly here. But they're all working together. Harry's a major part of it. He's got a strong karmic connection with Lama Zopa, no question. He's also got a strong karmic connection with Geshe-la Conscious, no question. Both of them have the power. I mean, even the lowest level bodhisattva, and there are 10 stages. From the time you realized emptiness, and then you start on your path, the next stages of your path to Buddhahood, you go through these 10 different stages, can take many lifetimes. But even the first level of these great bodhisattvas, these great saints, they're already capable of manifesting their mind in 100 different bodies simultaneously. So this is only really able to be understood if we study in more detail the Vajrayana teachings, the more esoteric teachings, because they describe the way things exist and all the subtle energies, and it's quite fascinating. But even the lowest level bodhisattva has the ability to manifest their mind in at least 100 forms simultaneously to benefit sentient beings, and they increase that power as they get all the way to Buddhahood. So it's a big interdependent scenario we're involved in, basically, Anyway, I hope that helps. I'm not sure. Well, I'm always shortchanging you, and I think I have to stop again. I think we've got enough now. 2 hours is so long, especially when I talk 3 times the pace of most people. I've always told you that, haven't I? That Miffy proved it one year. She had invited 3 of us nuns. I always quote this story. It's so stupid. In Brisbane, 30 years ago, she invited 3 of us nuns from Chen Raising Institute to come down to Brisbane to give us 90-minute talk on 3 Tuesdays. Then they transcribed our teachings. And the other 2 nuns took 8 pages and mine were 24. So it's probably about, for me, it's about 9 o'clock at night already. So you've had 3.5 hours already, you people. So I can...
Venerable Robina, I can verify that as well, because when I put the videos up on YouTube, I put little chapters points in there, and it's amazing how many words can come out in 3 seconds. That's what I discovered last night.
He's keeping notes of all the topics as we go, and I'm looking and thinking, how do we cover all of that in 4 minutes?
Yeah.
So there's anyway, I know it's very funny. This is very funny. It's true. It's really true.
We're very fortunate because that means we pack it in.
Yeah.
I know, but I keep thinking am I getting older, I'd slow down, but I haven't yet. Maybe I'm going to give up on slowing down. Anyway, never mind, you people. So we'll cut a bit early.